The deadliest pandemic in human history didn't start in Spain. It started on a pig farm in Kansas. And the governments of the world's most powerful nations, the United States, Britain, France, Germany, they knew exactly where it came from. They knew exactly how it spread. They watched it happen, and they made sure you'd never find out. The Spanish flu killed between 50 and 100 million people. That's more than every soldier and civilian killed in all of World War I combined. It infected 1 in every 3 human beings alive on Earth, 500 souls. And not a single warring nation officially reported its spread for months. The name Spanish flu is itself a lie, a geopolitical cover story that is still being taught in classrooms today. 50 million graves, built on a government's decision to stay silent. But the most horrifying part? A Kansas doctor tried to warn the world in January 1918. He filed a report, he rang the alarm, and the people in power chose to bury it. Now, the numbers, because you need to understand the scale of what was deliberately hidden. 195,000 Americans died in October 1918 alone, 1 month. 45,000 US soldiers were killed by this virus, more than were killed by German bullets in the entire war. In Philadelphia, 4,500 people died in a single week, 47,000 infected in 7 days. At Camp Devens in Massachusetts, 757 soldiers died in September 1918, with 14,000 hospitalized at the same time. Globally, the death toll ranges from 50 million to 100 million human beings. Not 50,000, not 5 million, 100 million human beings. Mothers, soldiers, children, gone. And their governments watched it happen in silence. Here's what they won't tell you. President Woodrow Wilson weaponized 2 laws, the Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918, to legally silence any newspaper that dared report on the epidemic. These acts made it a crime to publish anything that caused what they called insubordination or disloyalty. Health officials interpreted that to include flu reporting. Wilson's own propaganda machine, the Committee on Public Information, was simultaneously spreading false reassurances to the public while infected soldiers were being shipped across 3 continents. And Spain? Spain was neutral. Spain had no wartime censorship. Spain reported the flu honestly, and every warring nation looked at Spain's honest journalism and said it came from there. 1 president, 2 laws, 50 million dead. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a documented, deliberate policy decision, and we have the paper trail. Stay with me, because over the next 10 minutes, you are going to discover 3 truths that will permanently change how you look at your government's decisions during a health crisis. First, you'll learn the name of the 1 doctor who sounded the alarm in January 1918, whose written warning reached Washington, D.C. and was completely and deliberately ignored. Second, you'll watch as an American city held a parade for 200,000 people while its own health director privately knew a lethal virus was already spreading through its streets. Third, you'll see the specific, documented moment when governments chose war bond money over human lives and built a century-long lie to cover it up. By the end of this video, you will understand why the phrase Spanish flu is not just a misnomer. It is history's most successful government cover-up. To understand how this happened, you need to understand the world it happened in. January 1918. World War I is entering its catastrophic 4th year. 10 million soldiers are already dead. The trenches of Europe are rivers of mud and blood. The United States had entered the war only in April 1917, and President Woodrow Wilson had staked his entire presidency, his entire legacy on winning it. Wilson was terrified of dissent. To crush it, he created the Committee on Public Information, the CPI, under a man named George Creel. This was America's first official government propaganda bureau. The CPI deployed 75,000 trained civilian speakers called 4-Minute Men who gave pro-war speeches at movie theaters, church services, and public markets, anywhere Americans gathered. Their job was simple: keep the public enthusiastic about the war. And under the Espionage Act, more than 2,000 Americans were prosecuted simply for speaking against the war. Newspaper editors, peace activists, ordinary citizens. The message was crystal clear: if you undermine public confidence, you go to prison. In this environment, reporting that American soldiers were sick and dying was legally prosecutable as causing insubordination. The war machine had accidentally, or perhaps not so accidentally, created the perfect architecture for a pandemic cover-up. Before a single case of flu had been diagnosed. And into this tightly controlled, censored, propaganda-saturated world, an unknown Kansas doctor was about to discover something that would shake the entire planet. 3 people, 3 decisions, the fate of millions. The first is Dr. Loring Miner, a doctor in Haskell County, Kansas, a remote farming community surrounded by hog farms and grain fields, 300 miles from any major city. In January 1918, Miner starts seeing patients unlike anything in his decades of practice. Strong, healthy adults, farmers, laborers, young men in the prime of their lives knocked completely flat. Violent headaches, fevers spiking past 104 degrees, relentless, drowning coughs. Several of them die rapidly. Miner is alarmed. He's described as a large, imposing man, gruff, a player in local politics, someone not easily rattled. But what he is seeing rattles him deeply. Though influenza was not even a legally reportable disease at the time, Miner does something extraordinary. He formally files a written warning to the United States Public Health Service, describing in his own words, influenza of a severe type. His report is published in the official Public Health Reports Journal. And in the first 6 months of 1918, it will be the only mention of influenza anywhere in that publication. Washington receives Miner's warning and does absolutely nothing. The second figure is Albert Gitchell, an army cook, stationed at Camp Funston, Fort Riley, Kansas, the massive military training base where young men from communities exactly like Haskell County are being processed and shipped to Europe. The boys who had been exposed to Miner's patients, the boys who had already been carrying the virus. On March 4, 1918, Gitchell reports to the Camp Funston Infirmary. He is the first officially documented military case of the H1N1 pandemic. Within 2 weeks, 1,100 soldiers at Camp Funston are hospitalized. Because men are constantly moving between army camps across the country, New York, Massachusetts, Georgia, Illinois, the virus spreads like wildfire. From Kansas to New York, from New York to the transport ships, from the transport ships to France, from France to the entire planet. The third figure is Dr. Wilmer Cruzen, director of Philadelphia's Department of Health and Charities. Remember his name, because what he does and what he refuses to do will cause a catastrophe. On September 19, 1918, the flu arrives at the Philadelphia Navy Yard through returning sailors. Within days, 600 sailors are infected. Philadelphia's own physicians beg Cruzen to cancel an upcoming event, a massive Liberty Loan parade designed to raise war bond money. They know what's coming. They can see the infection spreading in real time. Cruzen listens to them. And then he says the parade would present no danger. 3 men, 3 decisions. And when 2 of them chose the wrong one, the body count became unimaginable. Here is how the catastrophe built, step by step, ignored at every turn. January 1918. Dr. Miner files his warning. Washington receives it. No response, no investigation, no quarantine, no alert, nothing. March 4th, 1918. Camp Funston erupts with 1,100 hospitalizations. The U.S. Army notes the numbers and then continues shipping infected soldiers to Europe aboard overcrowded transport ships where men sleep stacked in bunks, sharing the same recycled air for weeks at sea. March to April 1918. The first wave spreads across France, Britain, Italy, and Germany. Every warring nation's press is legally barred from reporting on sick or dying soldiers. Letters home from infected troops are intercepted and destroyed by military censors. The virus spreads unseen, unreported, and uncontained because the governments refuse to acknowledge it exists. Then summer comes, and something changes inside the virus. Mutating through millions of infected bodies crowded together in the trenches, the flu develops a second wave, more aggressive, more lethal, a version of itself that can kill a perfectly healthy 25-year-old within hours. By September 1918, this second wave reaches the United States. It arrives first at the Philadelphia Navy Yard, 600 sailors infected. Cruson knows. Every city official knows. The doctors are screaming for a cancellation. Philadelphia needs to raise $259 million in war bonds. The financial pressure is enormous. And so, on September 28, 1918, the Liberty Loan Parade goes ahead. 200,000 Philadelphians pack the streets, one of the largest gatherings in the city's history. Brass bands, soldiers in uniform, city officials waving from cars. Families pressed shoulder to shoulder for miles along the parade route. No masks, no warnings, no precautions of any kind. Behind the scenes, Cruson confirmed the flu was in the civilian population 9 days earlier. He knew, and he sent 200,000 people into the streets anyway. What followed is almost incomprehensible. 24 hours after the parade, 118 Philadelphians report with what their doctors describe as a mysterious, deadly influenza. 48 hours later, Cruson is forced to publicly admit the Spanish flu has entered the civilian population. 72 hours after the parade, every single bed in Philadelphia's 31 hospitals is full. Not most beds, every bed. Within 1 week, 4,500 dead, 47,000 infected. And then comes the body crisis. Philadelphia's city morgue was built to hold 36 bodies. It is receiving over 200 per day. Corpses are left on front porches because families have nowhere else to put them. Bodies are stacked in stairwells of apartment buildings. Coffins run out completely. The city is forced to requisition ice cream storage warehouses to hold the overflow of the dead. Priests are driving horse-drawn carts through the streets, calling for residents to bring out their dead. The same scene from the Black Death of the Middle Ages playing out in a 20th century American city. A nurse who worked through those weeks later described what she saw in words that are impossible to forget. The faces of the dead were a dark mahogany color from cyanosis. They choked on their own blood. Their lungs were literally drowning them from the inside. And while Philadelphia was becoming a city of the dead, President Woodrow Wilson, the commander-in-chief of the most powerful nation on earth, refused to say a single public word about the influenza pandemic. Not one word. The carnage didn't stop in Philadelphia. By October 1918, the flu was killing Americans faster than any event in recorded history. 195,000 deaths in a single month. In the military, 45,000 soldiers killed by influenza, exceeding every American battlefield death in World War I combined. At Camp Grant in Illinois, the death toll hit 117 soldiers in a single day, October 6, 1918. Globally, the virus was merciless. India loses between 12 and 17 million people. In Western Samoa, 22% of the entire population dies in weeks because their colonial government refused to enforce quarantine ships arriving in harbor. Some communities in Alaska lose every single adult, not most, every adult. And on November 11, 1918, the war ends. Armistice. Millions of people flood into city streets across the world to celebrate, dancing, embracing, shouting. And in doing so, they ignite the third wave. While all of this is happening, the Wilson administration's response is a masterclass in deliberate deception. Newspapers are running headlines like "Flu nearly beaten," while hospital hallways are so full that patients are lying on floors. The Philadelphia Inquirer publishes "No need for alarm" on the same day its city's morgue is processing 200 bodies a day. Soldiers' letters home describing mass illness are being physically intercepted and incinerated by military censors, and the name Spanish flu is being quietly cemented into history. Here's how that lie was constructed. Spain wasn't at war in 1918. Spain had no wartime censorship laws. When the flu hits Madrid in the spring of 1918, including a confirmed outbreak affecting King Alfonso XIII himself, Spanish newspapers reported freely and honestly. Every warring nation, the United States, Britain, France, Germany, looks at Spain's honest journalism and does the same thing. They point and say it's coming from Spain. The name sticks because the nations responsible for spreading it control the global information narrative. And the actual origin, American military camps in Kansas, is suppressed in every official communication. Wilson's Committee on Public Information directs public health officials to use phrases like "ordinary influenza" and "no cause for alarm." The Milwaukee Journal has its mailing license threatened simply for printing content deemed insufficiently patriotic, a warning that terrifies editors across the country into complete self-censorship. On October 1, 1918, the same week 195,000 Americans are dying, the official United States Public Health Service releases the following bulletin: "There is no need for alarm. The situation is well in hand and under control." George Creel's propaganda machine is printing posters that week reading "Buy war bonds, keep America strong." The lie held for decades, until modern science made it impossible. In 2004, epidemiologist and historian Dr. John Barry published The Great Influenza, a landmark work that traced the pandemic's origin systematically to Haskell County, Kansas in January 1918. Using Dr. Miner's original USPHS report and archives of the local Santa Fe Monitor newspaper, which recorded the names of young men leaving for Camp Funston in early 1918, the same boys who carried the virus into the largest military training base in America. Australian Nobel laureate Macfarlane Burnet had already concluded that the evidence was strongly suggestive the disease began in the United States and spread to France with the arrival of American troops. And in 1997, scientists exhumed the preserved lung tissue of 1918 flu victims from the Alaskan permafrost. Genetic reconstruction of the H1N1 virus confirmed it had the biological characteristics of an avian swine hybrid, exactly the kind of virus that would emerge from a farming community with large hog populations and migratory bird flyways, exactly matching the geography of Haskell County, Kansas. The initial government death toll estimate was 500,000 Americans. Modern CDC analysis using archived death records puts the real U.S. figure at 675,000, 35% higher than the government ever admitted. Globally, estimates have been revised upward from 20 million to 100 million as historians gained access to previously classified military hospital records from Britain, France, and Germany. Think about that. A death toll being quietly revised upward for 100 years, because they still haven't fully counted all the bodies their silence created. So let's be completely clear about what happened. In January 1918, a Kansas doctor named Loring Minor watched healthy adults choke and die from an unknown flu. He formally reported it to the US government. His warning sat in a journal, unanswered, while the men who had been exposed were loaded onto trains and shipped to military bases across America. In March 1918, those men arrived at Camp Funston. Over 1,000 of them got sick. The Army kept shipping soldiers to Europe anyway, because the war machine could not stop. In September 1918, a government health official in Philadelphia knew the second, far deadlier wave had arrived in his city. 200,000 people attended a parade. The morgues filled in days. And throughout every single one of those moments, President Woodrow Wilson, the man who asked young Americans to die for freedom and democracy, said nothing. Not one public statement, not one warning. He signed the laws that made it illegal for newspapers to tell you the truth. The Spanish flu was not Spanish, it was American. And it was made catastrophic by a deliberate, documented, government-enforced silence. Every time a government says no need for alarm during a health crisis, remember October 1918. Remember the 195,000 Americans who died that month while official bulletins declared the situation well in hand. Remember the 200,000 people at a parade whose government knew the virus was already spreading and sent them into the streets anyway. The lesson of 1918 is not about a virus. It is about what happens when governments decide that information is a weapon and choose to aim it at their own people. If this changed how you think about history and about who controls the information you receive, hit that like button right now. Subscribe, because next week we're going deeper into the events that governments spent decades erasing. And the next time someone calls this the Spanish flu, you'll know exactly why that name was chosen and exactly who chose it.